This is a Dreamcast disc and is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers.
Dreamcast, up to 6 billion players.
Welcome back to the stage of history.
Why don't we play together?
Hey, it's time to make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go!
Please stop this disc now.
Greetings, junkies. Welcome to the Dreamcast Junkyard DreamPod. My name is Brian, and today we are going to be talking about a topic that's a bit near and dear to our hearts. As you're probably aware, this marks the 25th anniversary of the North American launch of the Dreamcast console, 9/9/99. And to join me in celebrating this momentous occasion, I have a few guests from this side, well, some side of the pond, maybe both sides of the pond, but have a couple of American friends joining us to chat about their recollections and perspectives of the Dreamcast. And joining me is my fiance, Katie. How are you doing, Katie?
I'm doing all right. How about you, Brian?
Good. And then also joining for this chat is our friend Derek Alexander, aka Stop Skeletons from Fighting. How are you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing all right. And if I'm not mistaken, we're talking about this side of the pond. Katie, you grew up on the East Coast, the Northeast, is that right?
I did, yeah. I guess Mid-Atlantic, technically.
As I was born in Alaska and now live in Washington, so I am thoroughly representing this side of the pond for America.
So two very large ponds.
Yeah,
I got the entire Pacific here, so...
the other Washington, as we call it, on the East.
It is frustrating to move to a place called Washington, and then when anybody in, American news or politics says Washington, they mean D.C. and not my new state.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking naming the state that, in all honesty. It was only setting it up for confusion.
They didn't ask me what I thought. I could have given them some input.
I mean, George Washington is on the flag, so maybe.
That's a good question. That's for a different podcast.
Yeah, also joining us is Lewis from the UK. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. I have just got back off a holiday, or a vacation as you call it, in your fair country. So I am fully qualified to talk about the American Dreamcast launch. So I'm all in. Let's go.
I believe we refer to it as a vacay.
A vacay.
Yeah.
And depending on how far you make it from home, we could also call it a staycation.
Because your country is so huge that you can just go to a different state and that's a vacation. Whereas, we tend to go to France or something in the UK.
But if we're talking for total distance, like to go from, England to France or Italy, that is like going from Washington to Texas. It's and also I don't know what they're saying in that state either. I can hardly understand it. So
yeah. I totally misunderestimated how large the USA is when I went over there, and I was like, oh, let's go on a trip to here for the day. And it's like, how long away is that? 5 hours, whereas you could probably get to London from where I live in 3. So yeah, big place.
By train. You have pretty good connections from Manchester to London, don't you?
Yeah, unless there's strikes.
Oh God. And when you talk trains, it's like, Brian, the train to Linwood past Northgate is going to open in 2 weeks.
Oh my God.
So we can now finally get to...
Congrats.
Yeah, we can take a train from, the north part of Seattle to the southern part of, to technically Tacoma. Yay, we have a train. We can travel the whole distance of our city. Take that, Europe.
It's kind of funny because I feel like we've been counting down to that, and like whenever we'd see you guys, and you'd have to drive either to somewhere in Seattle to take the train, or just drive to where we were. It was kind of funny how, I don't know, we would always be like, oh man, this would be so much easier if that Linwood train was open. And lo and behold, finally, it's happening.
I've talked about it on Twitter before, because the drive to Seattle, I get to watch this train being built the last couple of years, and I tweeted about it like, oh man, I can't wait this train to be done. And a friend of mine who's like, oh, I grew up in Seattle. We voted on that in '96. They're finally building it. I moved away years ago. I gave up hope. I was like, move back. They're finally building it.
So yeah, if you ever I don't know, feel a bit down about the state of the trains in the UK, just know that there's a lot of places that haven't made that progress yet, or that are just barely scratching the surface of it, Lewis.
Wow.
I'm going to say the sad thing is Seattle's actually pretty good compared to most of the country.
Yeah, to the rest of the world, it's like a laughing stock, but like for America, that we have multiple buses and a train, and plans to extend the train for like almost the rest of this century. They have plans going until like 2050. But that'll just be all the various corners of Seattle and kind of across the water. But as opposed to a big fat bullet train that would take you to, say, Portland or LA or San Francisco or something like that. Nah, there are trains that do that, but they're just, I think it is like a couple of days to go from Seattle to San Francisco.
I think the first train that Katie and I rode when we got to the UK was to Paris. So,
oh, the Eurostar, yeah. I can't help but I don't know.
We've only flown or driven.
That's right. We had to drive onto the train. I guess that doesn't really count.
Is this like whole conversation like a building up to a segue where we all just talk exclusively about Densha to go for the whole podcast?
Oh, don't get me started.
We could. Derek did do a video of that.
He did.
Oh, and you know what? I did do a video, and Brian, you were kind of like the it's your fault, kind of.
All right.
Because you lent me your Saturn Densha go. And then I just happened to find 2 other Densha goes, and I was like, I gotta make a video now that I have 3 of these things.
At the very least, I was an enabler.
Yeah.
It was like the butterfly effect, because as I was saying to Derek before the call started, I went out after seeing Derek's video and bought a Densha Go controller for the Dreamcast. So this is all thanks to you, Brian.
Yeah. I hope you're happy.
Yeah, the Dreamcast. I guess we could talk about the Dreamcast.
Yeah, let's go.
Sure. That is, I guess, why we're here. Although if we wanted to just talk about Densha Go, we could do that too. But as I mentioned earlier, this marks roughly the 25th anniversary of the North American release of the console. Depending on whenever you listen to this, I guess. But I know Derek and Katie, you both owned Dreamcasts at some point, when it was around. And so I really just wanted to kind of start off and ask how you came to get the system and what your early experiences were with it. Katie, maybe we'll start with you if you'd like to share that.
Sure. So we first got the Dreamcast for Christmas, and it was the result of a years-long campaign by me trying to convince my parents to get a home console of some flavor. Any flavor. I remember starting back when like the Genesis and the Super Nintendo were a thing, and it continued through the release of the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation, and finally some family friends had gotten a Dreamcast and they really liked it, and they showed it off to my mom and dad. So it was a special treat from Santa under the tree that year, and we were thrilled, me and my siblings.
And what were the games that you all played for it?
So there were a few. So Sonic Adventure and Sonic Shuffle were by far the favorites. But I think we also had an MLB game that ostensibly for my dad, but mostly us kids played it. And then I can never remember the name of it. It was that Star Wars Jedi beat 'em up thing that was really hard.
Jedi Power Battles?
Yeah, there we go.
Is that okay?
Me and my sister would play it together and try and get as far as we could. It's a good thing you're kids, because you don't really care when you die that much. You're just like, oh well, you pick up and play again.
That's fair. I feel like I never really played Sonic Shuffle until you and your sisters would have it. I think we played it when they would come over every now and then.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That was like my first introduction to that whole world. And honestly, I think it was very different than I was expecting. Because I believe it's the same developer as the Mario Party, or at least the first couple Mario Party games.
Oh, yeah. No, my controversial opinion, it's better than Mario Party. I like that you can actually choose the number of spaces that your character can go. I actually didn't find out until I was like in my 20s, maybe, that the internet apparently is not a big fan of Sonic Shuffle, and that it's not well loved. I think that's because the CPUs do play to kill. Like, they're actually really hard. They steal your cards all the time. But again, we were kids, didn't really know any better. You just figure out strategies around it. We did, I think, unlock all of the characters, so we must have gotten quite far through the story mode.
Wait, what other characters are there other than Knuckles and Tails and Amy and Sonic?
Oh goodness, you can be Super Sonic, a Chow. I think can you be Tikal? I can't remember. I definitely remember Super Sonic and the Chow, because I think those were the characters we were the most excited to play as. Hold on, I'm gonna look this up.
That's fair. Yeah, I will say, as a game that I probably, I'll admit I was not necessarily having a great time the first few times we played it, but I also have resigned to the fact that you're kind of at the mercy of its RNG in a way, especially with the CPU, as you talked about, Katie. And so I think my impressions improved once I just let go of the things that were out of my control.
Well, also a game like that typically is better. I'm not sure how many siblings you have, Katie, but like if it was four of you could get together and play and there weren't any computer players, to me that would speak to the reason why you have reverence for this game. Because I played it, I think I rented it back in the day, and my recollection of Sonic Shuffle was it was not good, but that was so long ago now. But it's like certain people, I don't particularly like Mario Party, but I have met people that do like Mario Party, and it's typically because I either have a lot of siblings or they had a friendship, they had a clique, they had like college buddies, and it was always 4 human players playing that game. And I think that kind of changes the dynamic a little bit, and probably makes the game more enjoyable, because especially the early Mario Party games, like, yeah, there's some RNG, there's some just straight up kind of cheating. Those games kind of like, I never particularly cared for them, to be honest, but that everyone has the games that they had as a kid and you love them, and then you find out like, wait, no one liked this game. So, I would not take that away from you, Katie.
To be fair, you probably couldn't. I've had like easily several years of the internet telling me that they didn't like it, and it's not really changed my opinion. The other unlockable characters, by the way, are Big and Gamma. But
Gamma?
Yeah, actually, Gamma, yeah.
Who is that? Okay, I don't.
Yeah, the robot in Sonic Adventure.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, he might actually have the best single player story in that game. It's the only one with any any emotion to it. But no, in Sonic Shuffle, I think between my friends and my sisters, we almost always had the ability to have 4 players. But it helped that and actually, when you have 4 human players, okay, so the thing that really stinks about playing against the CPUs is they have the magic ability to see into your hand, and in the game, you can take cards and play them from other people's hands. So imagine that, like, no matter what your hand is, the CPU on their turn doesn't play their cards. They take the best card from your hand and they play it. Like, that's what it's like playing against the CPU. Yeah. And that really does stink. The only way around it is that when you're playing the game, you can shuffle your hand. And if you're ever going to play the CPU, this is what I figured out in single player mode. You start shuffling your hand before the CPU's turn starts, and you don't stop till it's done. That way there's a chance they won't actually get your good cards because they go to where they think the card was previously. But with 4 people, it's a lot of fun. Yeah, I don't know. I still think it's less random than Mario Party because like all the moves and everything in that game is decided by dice rolls. If you ever like, you can choose the number of squares you're going to move. If you ever like fight bosses, they'll put a roulette up where you go like through 1 through 7 essentially, and you have to get a higher number than whatever it is you're fighting. But you can time that honestly, because it'll show the cards as it's spinning. So that's not really random either, actually. You just have to figure out where it goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then time your stop for that. Almost all of the, the dials they spin, you can time that. We figured it out. And then the mini games, like, probably don't hold up that well anymore controls wise. I think the last few times I played it, I remember thinking they were really clunky. But, a lot of stuff was in that time, and man, I had a lot of fun with them.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that there's like kind of layers to hacking Sonic Shuffle that let everybody just indulge in the chaos together in a way that everyone has more fun.
That high level tech.
You just got to know the metagame.
You do.
I have not thought about Jedi power battles in ages. I don't even know how I was able to pick that name out for you, Katie.
I'm impressed.
I just happened to look it up. So apparently the PlayStation version of Jedi Power Battles came out April in North America, May in Europe. But the Dreamcast version for both North America and Europe came out in October 2000. And apparently the Dreamcast version reviewed much, much better. And it would appear between the GBA, PS1, and Dreamcast. Dreamcast version, the Dreamcast port of Jedi Power Battles is the superior one that has a lot of fixes and extra stuff. So, that was that you lucked into that one, and one of the better rated Star Wars games, I believe. I did not realize that.
I didn't realize that.
This is going to sound random, but for the Dreamcast version, do you remember if they made Mace Windu's lightsaber purple?
No, it was the wrong color on the cover.
Oh.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't know that we ever got far enough to unlock him. We maybe made it 3 levels in, so.
They don't mention that on this Wikipedia page. I'm sure if I went to a Star Wars wiki, they would break that down, but I believe that's out of the depth of this podcast.
No, it's fair. We can't fact check everything. Well, cool. And then, so the other games you said you played, well, Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 are classic, right?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Well, yeah, we got Sonic Adventure 2 the moment we came out. We were so into those games. Like, not just my sisters. I had neighborhood friends at the time who were really into them too. And we'd come up with like these elaborate, essentially fan fiction for what happened, like to all the characters and all the unexplained stuff. We had all these ideas for after how everything went after the end of Sonic Adventure 2 and how Shadow survived and stuff like that.
But the greatest part of Sonic Adventure 2, which should be a game in its own right.
Oh, yes, the Chow Garden. It needs to be a game. I honestly cannot believe that, like, Sega hasn't made a free-to-play, like, awful predatory version of this game yet, because, like, you really could. It'd be quite easy, too. Yeah. But, oh, the Chow Garden. We sunk hours into that. And, like, in Sonic Adventure 2, it's built so well for it, too, because once you complete the game, it's just really easy to go back and select a level and go through and collect all the, like, the Chow drives to, level up your Chows and the animals to change the way they look. Like, you can do that in a minute or two, then go back to the Chow Garden and hang out with your little Chow buddies.
Oh, classic.
And you can pick them up and you can bring them into the water and you can punt them across the arena.
You can.
Yeah, if you're a jerk.
You have the power to be An angel or a devil?
Oh, yeah, because there were like nice chows and then evil chows, but yeah, when you say like there wasn't a Chow Garden game, it's like, well, there was the VMU, and then on the GameCube ports there was sort of like the GBA game you could download onto it. Like,
Yeah.
a predatory iPhone iOS game has not happened, and that's probably for the better. But that there wasn't some kind of flip phone, early smartphone Chow Garden type game before microtransactions and free to play is quite criminal. Did you play the minigame stuff on the VMU and the GBA?
Oh yeah. Not the GBA. I actually didn't get my first GameCube till I was an adult, but we definitely used the VMU. The VMU might be one of my favorite parts of the Dreamcast. It was a brilliant idea, honestly. But yeah, it was really cool to be able to take your chows just with you, and I could fit it in a pocket and be out on an adventure with your chow, and it was a little fun mini game to keep you occupied. But I'm not implying that they should come up with like a predatory mobile game, by the way. My preference is they come up with a real one. But like, yeah.
Yeah, it just seems like something they would have done, right?
Yeah.
Although, yeah, I mean, Derek, are you sure there wasn't one on N-Gage or anything? There should have been.
I think that like they just went all in on Sonic stuff. There's a ton of Sonic things on, flip phones and the like. But to my I'm not really an expert when it comes to like Sonic and Sega stuff, but I have done some research on the GBA and the Chow Garden stuff, and I feel like I would have come across a little cell phone game. I'm sure it has been pitched, and I think Katie's heart is in the right place, but also it's stayed pure, right? It hasn't been corrupted with a free to play, predatory iOS game that's just menus and cooldowns, but you got to buy diamonds, and if you act now, you get 8 diamonds for free. Spend $20, those kinds of things.
Oh yeah.
You can still go back to, if you want to do your Chow Garden, you have to go back to your VMU, back to your Dreamcast, and it's stayed pure. It hasn't been corrupted.
Give him time.
Unless our save files have been.
Unfortunately, that might be true, yeah.
Well, cool. So yeah, Derek, I guess you also had a Dreamcast in your youth. I'll just let you tell the story.
Yeah, I didn't personally get a Dreamcast when things were looking dire. It was either right before or after Sega finally called it quits, but they dropped the price of a new Dreamcast to $100. And at the time, I was in high school, and $100 was not nothing. Yeah, I could save up for that, but I couldn't really drop $100. But when I got a Dreamcast, things were looking dire, but that meant all the used games were cheap, and I was able to kind of scoop them up. But my brother went all in on Sega. He loved the Saturn. He imported the N64 and didn't like Mario 64, and he was like, this sucks, I'm going back to my Saturn. And so he was there day one for the Dreamcast. And I've told this story before, but my earliest real experience with the Dreamcast was my older brother was in college. I was in high school. He comes back home from Babbage's or whatever, picks up the Dreamcast, and I get up ready to go to school, and I'm standing in the hallway watching the intro to Soul Calibur, which is still one of the most just epic, freaking super goddamn cool intros ever on a video game. But seeing that on a TV at home when you're used to PlayStation 1 and 64, it's mind blowing. So I'm standing in the hallway watching this insane intro, and when it ends, it goes, all the weapons hit on the screen, and then it goes, Soul Calibur. And my brother goes, have fun at school, and reaches over and shuts the door in my face.
Oh my god.
Classic older brother.
Yeah.
Were you able to sneak in and play it?
I was, yeah. That was kind of the fun thing, is because he was in college and had like a real job and had more money. He had like arcade sticks. And so, yeah, when he was away, I would sneak in and play Soul Calibur, and Power Stone is another one that I guess this is maybe a controversial topic to get into. I never liked Power Stone 2 quite as much because the 4-player dynamic, I felt like, took something away from. I understand why it's in the shadow of Smash Bros. I get why Power Stone 2 went 4-player, but I guess just me personally, the 2-player Power Stone 1 just felt more balanced and fun.
I could see that. I mean, I think a lot of the chaos is out of your control in number 2 compared to the first one.
Yeah, and I think that there's just like a more of a smaller balance and less of because I don't like Smash Bros. When it's like, okay, all items off Final Destination, so there's no platforming. It is just pure fight. Yeah, I don't know. That's not quite as interesting to me, because I feel like Smash Bros. And Power Stone, they have all the fun gimmicks and poles you can swing around, and boxes you can pick up and throw, and flamethrowers and rocket launchers and the like. But it felt more balanced. And I suppose, to be fair, I haven't played Power Stone 2 as much as Power Stone 1 because it's never really quite clicked with me. So maybe there is some nuance in tech that I don't really see. But I still think that like Power Stone 1 and, of course, Soul Calibur 1 are both utterly fantastic games. And not only do I think they hold up, the fact that Power Stone wasn't even it wasn't an arcade game, right? I don't believe it was.
Yeah, it was.
It wasn't. Okay, my mistake then. Mm-hmm. But there was a Soul Calibur machine at the mall where I grew up, and I could just see that the Dreamcast version looked better. And that was such a meaningful moment because, you really wanted Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter to come out on the home system so that you could like practice. You could buy it and practice, and then you could go to the arcade and, be good. The idea that this system was like better than the arcade, or as good, or in the case of Soul Calibur, better. It was almost like, well, I'm going to buy Soul Calibur so I can get good and go to the arcade. It's like, why even do that? I have it better here at home, because that was the state of video games at the time. I think now it's sort of console gaming versus PC gaming, and which is better, which is more optimized. But there really was arcade was the top for the 80s and the 90s, and then the Dreamcast. I mean, the gap was slowly closing throughout the PS1 and N64 generation, but that moment, Soul Calibur was like, here it is, it's at home, and it looks better, probably plays better. I feel like a bit out of my depth to make that claim, but from a more casual perspective, that was kind of Sega putting the nail in their own coffin and kind of killing the arcade, or definitely moving that needle in killing the arcades. And that's just still something that I think that maybe these young kids don't realize, but that was what was so meaningful about Soul Calibur, and Power Stone running so goddamn good, looking so goddamn good at home.
Yeah. I mean, at a certain point I think there were a lot of factors that were all closing in on the arcade's demise at that point. I mean, the sensibilities of game design that was shifting towards more progression heavy and narrative focused experiences and RPGs. I mean, that was a huge, I think, part of that paradigm shift as well. But yeah, I think the Dreamcast seemed to be maybe the last console that really strived to try to anchor itself or anchor the arcade as an integral part of its identity, because so many of Sega's releases and Capcom's releases for the console, and yeah, of course, Soul Calibur, I mean, we're all bridging that divide between arcade and consoles in a time where arcades were kind of falling out of favor for a lot of reasons. And yeah, you're right. That's probably victims of their own success in some way.
Yeah, and I think that, fighting games was one of the few genres that, with all the progress that home consoles in terms of genre and in terms of graphics fidelity, fighting games was still like one of those things. It's like, nah, that's still, arcade still has fighting games. It doesn't have the RPG, it doesn't have Final Fantasy VII, doesn't have Resident Evil, but we have Street Fighter. We have, we have our Mortal Kombats, we have our Soul Calibers, and that was one more kind of nail to it. It was like, no, you don't really have fighting games anymore. Like, this is the era of Smash, and that was when Third Strike, came to Dreamcast. And my understanding is that the Dreamcast port of Third Strike was pretty solid. Up until that point, fighting games were in the arcades, but after the Dreamcast, and probably to a certain degree, Virtua Fighter 3, I'm sure that was more meaningful in Japan, but yeah, it's kind of strange to think of the Dreamcast as very much arcade focused. But one of the problems with Sega was they didn't really kind of pull out of arcades in time, and their arcade businesses were kind of sinking. And that was just one of the many things that was kind of anchoring it into the bottom of the sea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess going to their DNA as a game maker, right? I mean, arcade type experiences were their bread and butter. And so to ask them to just, I don't know, follow the lead of what Sony and other, and Square and other prominent publishers were doing, just would kind of be a little bit out of the bounds, I suppose, of what we might expect their ability to pivot in that way. I mean, of course, they did double down on hugely ambitious narrative games. I mean, Skies of Arcadia and, of course, Shenmue. And, the Dreamcast had a few of those, but it wasn't necessarily a point of focus for Sega going into that period, I suppose.
Well, the North American release, and probably the European release as well, of the Dreamcast, it's interesting because Sega was such a kind of an arrogant company, or just very kind of stubborn. Because it's my understanding that, the Dreamcast launched in Japan and it was kind of a bust. And so then the American and European sides of Sega were like, we're going to make this an event. And sure enough, the Saturn was a total dud in North America, at least. And, but man, people who were around for the Dreamcast, they remember the Dreamcast. It was such a good media blitz. The 99.99 campaign was so great, because they had the extra time after the Japanese launch, that the American, and then also the European release, the launch games that came out on Dreamcast, because they had that extra time and they really were strategic with it. Still one of the best launch lineups in the history of games. And despite all the success, Sega Japan was still like, but we weren't successful in Japan, so we're kind of done. And,
well, yeah.
Or is that really true? I guess you guys are the experts. I mean, that's kind of it's Sega. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I'm not sure how much choice they honestly had. I mean, they were kind of hemorrhaging money for the whole back half of the 90s. And so they really didn't have many resources to brute force it through, especially once the PS2 was coming out and the Xbox and GameCube were on the horizon. I just don't think they had much left financially to even...
I mean, and that is also true. As much as I love Dreamcast, is if you look at the PS2 and just the PS2, and look at what they released in 2001, there's no world where the Dreamcast can survive against, Gran Turismo 3, Metal Gear Solid 2, Grand Theft Auto 3, Devil May Cry, Final Fantasy X, a bunch others. It was just, that was the moment where, man, PS2 came out and became PS2 kind of coasted on that momentum and never looked back, and it was just never gonna happen. But it is still the Dreamcast, just never. It's still a such a revered system,
for sure.
It was short lived. Its success was such a short, I don't know, a year and a half or so, where it was part of that conversation. But I mean, hell, this is the junkyard. We're the junkies. I mean, it's like the Dreamcast like is just one of the kind of like the classic It's also a good story, but in addition to like, it being kind of a classic underdog system, genuinely has a legendary catalog, and even games like Shenmue, which I kind of personally feel like is a fascinating kind of not a failure, but like I Shenmue is such a strange and ambitious game, and you would just need to be crazy to try and make that game. And thank God for them. Bless their heart for trying to make that game, and they made it. It's such a weird game to have been trying to make at the time that they made it, but it's kind of just this amazing. I don't want to say it's an amazing failure because it isn't, but it's such a fascinating, weird game. I play it and I go, man, this is great. Why? Why did they make this game? It is incredible, but it just seems like the technology's not quite there, and it's such a clunky and strange game. But man, they made it, and the perfect storm of weird shit from the Dreamcast and off the Saturn, and only a company like Sega would make something so ambitious and strange.
So at this point, we're going to take a quick break before we resume the discussion surrounding the Day 1 launch lineup. That is the 19 launch games that were available on September 9th, 99 in North America. But in the meantime, we've invited friend and stalwart of the Dreamcast community, another Derek, as it so happens, Derek Pascarella, to share his thoughts and memories and personal stories surrounding the Dreamcast. So with that, we'll turn it over to him.
The Sega Dreamcast. I really can't even tell you how many emotions just those two simple words conjure up for me. I know it sounds kind of sappy, but it's just such a special machine, and I guess it came at just the right time in my life, thinking back to that oh-so-famous and brilliantly marketed release date of 9/9/99 here in North America. As a kid that age, I was just old enough to, kind of start having my own money, and old enough to kind of have more autonomy over the types of games I played and bought and all of that, and still young enough, though, to really be captured by just, the pure imagination and wonder. I can never forget seeing the Dreamcast kiosks at game stores and, Virtua Fighter 3 TB, Sonic Adventure, Crazy Taxi, things like that, and I could not believe my eyes. I could not believe this was a home game console, and I couldn't believe it was something that I would soon have. I actually pre-ordered the Dreamcast, and it was the very first console I ever pre-ordered in my life. I have such vivid memories of standing at the counter. It was at an electronics boutique at the time, and giving them, I think it was $50, $50 to pre-order and reserve one under my name. And when I finally got that thing, it was just incredible. And the buzz amongst my friends, even my cousins, everybody was just so excited for that machine. And even if the Saturn, which I also love and adore, had kind of come and gone without much impact for, unfortunately, a pretty large swath of the American gaming public, people just could not help but be super excited at the Dreamcast. You know, going on from there, Dreamcast is a machine that, honest to God, has never been relegated to a box in my closet or kept under the bed or in storage. From the day I got it, it has always been hooked up to some type of television in my home, right? First my childhood home, college, first apartments, and, you know, obviously right up until where I live today. Of course, back then I had one Dreamcast. Today I have, I don't know, half a dozen more. But yeah, it's been a very important piece of my gaming life ever since. And through those years, you know, when it was very popular and relevant, getting new titles, buying new peripherals, all of that stuff was so exciting. I remember playing games like Soul Calibur when it came out with a friend of mine who slept over, and we must have played that game. It felt like we played it for 12 hours straight, you know, without sleeping or even really eating much. We were just so into it. I even remember things like bringing VMUs to school, and there was this little Sega-branded lanyard that, I don't know, was part of some type of promotion back then, and bringing them to school, and a couple of kids, you know, trading save files or like Chow Garden data. I can't remember exactly what it was, but that'd be at lunchtime, of course, right, when all the best stuff happens, sitting there with our gaming magazines, reading about the newest stuff coming out, super excited. It was just really an incredible time, and obviously a lot of that is fueled by nostalgia, but who cares, right? Nostalgia's a powerful, amazing feeling. I would add also that, you know, in those years, I really started getting into some of the Dreamcast, let's call them different scenes that existed online at the time. I'd been a kid on the internet, I guess maybe earlier than most back then. My father worked out of the house. We had a phone line with internet at home, then later got DSL and cable and all of that before most others did. So I was actually downloading games and movies back then at a very young age, and started getting Dreamcast games also. And, you know, obviously there's some stigma there with piracy and all, but when you're a 13-year-old kid, to be able to download games from Japan that otherwise would cost you, you know, at that time a small fortune in my eyes to import, I did it completely shamelessly. I was able to experience and enjoy so much of the library that way. And it really opened up the console for me and let me enjoy so much that I ordinarily would never have. And thank God, because, you know, all these years later, it's a machine that still just captures my imagination and holds my interest, and I love working on it. Reverse engineering old software for it, developing translation patches, other little quality of life hacks and patches, and, you know, the community is just outstanding. And I just love knowing that anything I would put my blood, sweat, or tears into is being enjoyed by other Dreamcast fans. It's immensely rewarding and gratifying. So yeah, those were my years with the Dreamcast, summed up, I guess, in short. It's a machine that I will never, ever say goodbye to until, of course, the good Lord sees it fit for me to depart this earth. But until then, as they say, from my cold, dead hands. So long live Sega, and long live the Dreamcast.
big thanks to Derek for sharing such a thoughtful and personal recollection of his time with the Sega Dreamcast from back in the day. You can follow him on Twitter at Derek Pascarella, and you can also find his body of work at dreamcastforever.com. With that, we return to our regularly scheduled programming.
I think it's kind of crazy just to go back to the launch that in America they launched with 19 games, whereas in Japan they had 4. That is a big leap of software on launch.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about it a bit on, I guess we could consider this a companion episode for the Japanese anniversary one that we recorded back in November. But I think in that episode we talked a little bit about how the goals and the stakes were a bit different between the Japanese and North American launches. And really the Japanese launch, Sega of Japan's goal was to just get the thing out the door, get as much of a head start on the PS2 as possible. So, and then let the software come in later, and build that up, that momentum up, in between. Whereas the North American launch and European launches, of course, Derek, yeah, I think you're spot on. It's like, well, the stakes were pretty high at that point, and they needed to go full on with having as many enticing games across as many different genres and and attention-grabbing concepts as possible. And so, yeah, they really did make a huge focus of building up that library in time for $99.99. And I guess to that end, if we want to just go through what those games were a little bit, I don't imagine we've all played all of them, but I thought that it might make a kind of a fun little exercise if we were to go through a few of them, because some of the names were a little bit ambiguous for the time. And so if you don't know specifically what that game is about, you might have no idea what the concept was or what that game was trying to do. And so there's probably a few in the launch lineup that fall within that sort of category. And so I figured I might list the game. And then if you have played it and if you're familiar with it, tell me what it is or what you think that game is, but wrong answers only. Otherwise, if you hadn't heard of that game, then give your best genuine guess of what that title or what that game is about based on the title. I don't know. Does that make sense?
So if we know the game, wrong answers only based on the title.
Yep.
If we don't know the game, we take our best guess. Do we admit if we know the game beforehand?
Yeah. I'll just ask straight up if you're familiar or not with it, and then we'll go from there. And then whoever's not familiar, maybe we'll go first, just because I think that'll be funnier. All right, let's start the first one here. Expendable. Have you heard of, or are you familiar with Expendable?
Yeah, I have it. I've played it only once or twice. So I guess I will, not do this one.
No, that's fine. We'll just have Katie. Katie, I don't think you've.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this one, but based on the title, Amazon didn't really work the same way back then. But let's just pretend it's about an Amazon warehouse employee.
It's like a Sega Gaga, but you run Amazon.
Yeah.
That's too real.
I mean, corporations were still exploiting people, whether it was Amazon or someone else.
Oh, yeah.
That's a pretty fair guess. How about you, Derek? What would you say the game is about? Incorrectly.
I feel like it would be like you're a robot, and the idea is when you die, a factory just pumps out a new robot. And it'd be just like a normal kind of a platforming game with like shooting and jumping and stuff like that. But the idea of like your extra lives are just that version of you dies and the robot just makes it. Yeah, I feel like Expendable, I'm leaning into like the factory kind of corporation angle of it again. I think
maybe you are a robot in an Amazon warehouse.
I think Derek's answer sounds more interesting than the actual game, to be honest.
It's.
So I'll summarize. I mean, the game itself was, it's a third-person run and gun shooter where you kind of went through pretty linear stages from it wasn't isometric. It was like kind of pseudo top-down, but the camera kind of shifted. It was
a bird's eye view Contra clone, and I don't recall it being a particularly good one.
Takes forever to load as well.
I feel like it had its charm, and I think I enjoyed it more last time I played it than in the past, but yeah, I don't know if I'd classify it as a particularly amazing game. But I do love the idea of a robot version of that. It's a platformer. All right, so the second game here, Pen Tri-Isolon.
I do know what this game is, and I've played it.
How about you, Derek?
I've not played it, but I know what it is. Or I think there's a demo of one of the Dreamcast magazine demo discs, and I believe that's my only experience with it. But I can't think of a funny wrong answer for it.
I'm trying to think of a funny one too.
I feel like Pen Tri-Isolon is so like wacky that any wrong answer would not trump what it actually is.
That's true.
Yeah, that's part of the problem. Yeah. Also, it weirdly is very like kind of descriptive in the name. Actually, there's no part of the name that does not tell you what it is.
That's true. I mean, I feel like they made up a word for Tri-Isolon.
Yeah.
It was too complicated for us in Europe because it just got released as Pen. I guess they thought we wouldn't understand what that was going for.
It's a calligraphy challenge where you go onto a lake and you have to draw. It's a calligraphy challenge, but you have to put the paper onto the lake. But if you push too hard, you'll break through the ice. And you'll drown. So that's.
I like it.
Calligraphy ice skating.
I guess I guess you have to skate off from land, skate onto the lake, and there's maybe like a sanctioned, area circle. This game is so incredibly Japanese. It's great. Yeah,
I don't know. I have a good time with it, especially multiplayer. I think it's held up, and of course, as the real answer, it's a kind of a racing game of sorts where you're a bunch of weird penguin hybrid creatures, and you either waddle through parts of the course, swim through parts of the course, or slide. And the sliding, of course, is always my favorite because you go fast and it's fun, but it's like kind of chaotic, and there's a lot of points in the courses where the paths will narrow, and there will be obstacles that will force everybody to kind of run into each other, and chaos ensues. And I don't know, I always thought it was almost a proto. What's the game that came out a few years ago? Fall Guys, right?
Oh yeah, it kind of does have.
Oh really?
Yeah, it almost reminded me of that, playing it more recently.
Okay. Oh, and also he had one of the characters had a cameo in Blue Stinger, Taco Pen.
Yeah, 4 of them. So they like had the stamp collection rally.
Yeah, that's still my favorite moment in Blue Stinger, where you are supposed to be getting a key, or you're tasked to do something important. And then in order to get into a room to get an item, you have to wander around this area and get 4 stamps from the 4 different pen characters or whatever. But your friend calls you up and says, "Hey, did you get into the room?" And you just respond, "No, I'm trying to get Taco Pen." And then it cuts back to her, just like a blank face, just angry at you, thinking that you're just like fooling around and not actually like doing the task at hand. And then like, I don't know, Dog is like, "I guess that chick doesn't like jokes." But just her like blank upset stare at you I was playing that with my wife Grace, and we both just absolutely died laughing. It was so silly and so funny. It's great.
All right, well then let's do that. Blue Stinger, wrong answers only.
I was gonna say I knew that had to be next. Okay, well I've known this game and I've played it some, so let's see. It is about killer bees developed in the lab, and they're blue. They're like a bright blue, and they're chasing you around, and you gotta take them out. And the evil mad scientist who created them.
The soundtrack is Wu-Tang Clan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's like the Buck Bumble theme from N64.
Oh yeah.
Blue Stinger is just a Buck Bumble, the dark gritty reboot of Buck Bumble for the Dreamcast, where we explore existentially what is Buck Bumble, and it turns out he was Project Blue Stinger, and he's like, I'm an abomination. I must. Yeah, so maybe then it is Wu-Tang Clan. It's a little more dark and gritty.
Yeah, my only other guess is that it would be like, I don't know, in a sequel to Zoolander, it would be like his next signature look. The Blue Stinger. What was the first? It was originally what? Blue Steel?
Colt, yeah, Blue Steel, yeah.
Blue Stinger. The essence of stinging.
Yeah, yeah. But Blue Stinger, I feel like is, and this is maybe going to upset people, it's kind of like the Dreamcast's Toshinden, in that, like, when the PS1 launched, the first Battle Arena Toshinden game, I don't believe is really well regarded or remembered as a great game. But it was like a full 3D fighting game that I don't believe was an arcade game. I think it was a PlayStation original, and that was like so huge to see a 3D fighting game like on PlayStation at home, you know, not the arcade. I feel like Blue Stinger is like, well, we have our own Resident Evil. Like they try to spin it as like, we have our, you know, you can go get Resident Evil on PlayStation when we have our own survival horror game. And I think in that regard, for
Jimmy, we have Blue Stinger at home.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think though, like that was enough. Yeah, it's like, hey, we have Tekken at home. It's Battle Arena Toshinden. It's like, no, we have Resident Evil at home. It's Blue Stinger. I don't know that if it's really remembered well as a contender.
It's weird.
I think at the time, I think it was enough of a sales pitch that you could be like, well, Dreamcast even has survival horror. You know, it was the right move, but I don't think that Blue Stinger is great. Especially not compared to its you know, unofficial sequel Illbleed.
Yeah,
I think they're very different games, but yeah,
it feels a little more action movie like to me. To me, it feels like you took some like real cheesy 80s action movie and decided to turn it into a video game,
which I think was you know, the inspiration from Shinya Nishigaki and his team at the time. So it makes sense. I mean, they were heavily inspired by Alien and those types of movies.
Yeah, it was all right. It was. I guess I felt like the last time I played it, I was like, this is long, and I felt myself getting a little bored by the back half of it, and I was like, this game needs to kind of wrap itself up.
Yeah, I will say I've actually noticed a bit of a shift in recent years. I honestly think it's a little bit of the opposite in that the reception upon its release was not good.
Oh, really? It wasn't?
Oh, yeah. You go through the old EGMs and Next Gen magazines and Game Pros and, you know, Edge and everything. It was I think Edge gave it like a 5. And that was like one of the better reviews.
You know what? Yeah, now I'm looking at the Wikipedia page here for the reception, and yeah, I guess I thought this game was decently reviewed, but no, you're right. It was a lot of 4s and 5s and 7s and 6s.
Well, and I think part of it was that it was, you know, people knew that Resident Evil Code Veronica was imminent, and so that was probably top of mind. And so when people likened Blue Stinger to a survival horror type game at first, and which is how how it kind of marketed itself, especially in the West. That's how you know, Activision tried to sell it. And for its part, I think it was fairly successful commercially. I mean, I don't know exactly where the numbers come from, but I've seen it repeatedly cited that it sold about 500,000 copies, which for a Dreamcast game, especially an early release, was huge. And so, yeah, I think it was one of those ones that kind of had some sort of impact early on. I know for me, I was looking forward to it because it was one of the earlier games that they had shown off in magazines and stuff. And so I was kind of intrigued by a more vibrant sort of survival horror type game. But I think the trick is that more recently people have come around to liking the game, and a lot more, at least in the community. There's a lot of people, including myself. I will say it's probably my favorite Dreamcast game. It's certainly my favorite Dreamcast launch game. But part of that is contingent on the perspective that it was more of a brawler, or like a beat 'em up with adventure elements that was, more action, cinematic, B-movie influenced rather than trying to be a Resident Evil. Because if you do play it like a Resident Evil or Silent Hill, you're probably not going to have a good time. But if you play it just like as a big, dumb, fun beat 'em up, that's the frame of mind that I've enjoyed it the most over the years.
Yeah, I think them trying to sell it as survival horror was the right angle just to kind of get software moving and get people excited about the system. But yeah, I think I went into it thinking it was a survival horror game because there's some body horror elements and it's a little violent and spooky. But no, it is not the type of game you turn out the lights and get into the mood. It's Code Veronica was absolutely the type of spooky game where you can get into the mood.
Yeah,
this was not, and I think it's fine for that. It's still a game that I think you could play and enjoy, and it's really corny and campy and fun. I think it's. I wasn't so impressed with it when I played it through pretty recently, but
yeah,
I wouldn't call it terrible. Yeah, I think to call it your favorite Dreamcast game,
it is.
And actually, Brian, you and I have had this discussion off microphone with beers and stuff, but I disagree with that level of reverence. But
oh man,
I understand. I just think the game was just a little too. I was just so bored by the end of it, and kind of like, this needs to be over. I'm kind of done. I think that's kind of like the biggest sin.
Yeah, it's definitely not for everybody, and I would not recommend it for everyone. In the same way, I would not recommend like a Shenmue or something to everyone. But yeah, I think for me personally, I just think its charm cuts through so much of the hang-ups we might otherwise have. And I just think it was a legit fun game to collect enough money by beating up monsters and then getting some of the bigger weapons that let you cause massive explosions or get the lightsaber or the power mixer or all these random weapons that really, it almost was maybe a proto like Dead Rising in a way.
Yeah.
As far as kind of style of beat 'em up that at least the way that I enjoyed it. So, but yeah, it's definitely not for everybody, but I would say any game that has a character like Dog's Bower is probably not really taking itself too seriously. And I mean that in a good way. All right. So next game, how about TNN Hardcore Heat?
I've got this one.
Go for it, Lewis.
This is a spiritual sequel to the Firemen on Super Nintendo.
That's a very wholesome answer, Lewis.
Oh, yeah, Hardcore Heat, and you just went with fire.
Yeah,
literally fire.
You have to endure the hardcore heat. That's the aim of the game. I don't know about the TNN. Is that like a channel that you had in the USA? I think.
I don't. If we had TNT,
it was.
Turner.
Yeah, we had TNT.
It stood for what? Nashville something network.
I mean,
honestly. Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I know this is a racing game, and that's not been my favorite genre. So I've not played it, and I've not really heard of it. It's possible I saw it on the shelves as a teen and skipped it, but yeah, racing game is my guess.
And you would be correct. Yeah, it's also called Buggy Heat in Japan and Europe, which I think is a tremendously superior title. But yeah,
If you take out the word motorsports and it's just called TNN Hardcore Heat, sounds like a wrestling game.
Ooh, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. The full title in North America was TNN Motorsports Hardcore Heat, which is kind of a mouthful.
I know Tom, who founded the Junkyard, is a big fan of this one. It's very like overly ambitious, and there's just like, I think I remember him. I've never played this, but he explained to me once that on one of the podcasts that there's like camera angles in the game. Like there's one that just shows you your guy in the cockpit for like no reason, just because the devs just felt spicy and were like, let's do that. Yeah, so bit of a contender for like punching above its weight in that regard. Hey, Derek, but yeah.
Oh shit, yeah. I'll be honest. This is the type of game that would probably be like out of my radar. I wouldn't think twice. God, but the more I look at the word Hardcore Heat, I'm like, why would you call your game Hardcore Heat? Or Buggy Heat. That's the more I look at this, the more I am very intrigued.
Is it? I suppose there's a lot of like desert tracks, right? Would that explain it? Maybe.
Well, heat's another term for a race.
Oh yeah.
So it's a hardcore race, guys.
That's the only reasonable interpretation that somebody might make.
Totally.
Well, that's like literally what it is, but like nobody was like, right, but boss, you know what that like. Still, outside of the context of a race, it's kind of weird to call it. But then this is the late 90s and everything was still edgy and Limp Bizkit and Korn. So, I could see how they were thinking, no, if we call it Hardcore Heat, that's just going to move like 100,000 more units.
All right. So this is also maybe a very 90s title. But what do you think Trick Style is about?
I feel like it can't be about anything else but extreme sports.
I was going to say, I know and have played this game too. So let me, just based on the title though, and wanting to move in a different direction, this is a game about fashion, but like fashion that's tricky. You think the outfit is one thing, and then they spin around on the runway and it turns out it's a completely different outfit.
Oh yeah, it's like those Project Runway episodes where like they come out and then they like surprise unclip 3 things on their shoulders and suddenly it's a dress or something like that. Yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking of.
Wait, what if all of the models are magicians?
Ooh. You could pull out even more tricks.
Oh, so you're kind of focusing on the trick aspect of it. Like it's that's okay, yeah. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then each time you walk out on the runway, you have to like prep and execute a specific trick.
And like Penn and Teller like give you advice on the next level or whatever.
I actually would play this game. This is starting to sound interesting.
Any other guesses?
Yeah, you have to develop your magical routine, but you also need to look fabulous while you do it.
Yep. Or maybe this is just turning into a stage magician game, because I would play that too, honestly.
I mean, otherwise, what's the point if you can't do it fashionably?
Yeah.
Like, is there really a reason to even try?
Well, now I think about like, okay, what are the other definitions of the word trick? Well, that's like prostitution. So.
You thought of Arrested Development too?
Yeah.
They're illusions.
Illusions, Michael.
Yeah. A trick is something someone does for candy. Yeah, what if it's like you are out there and you need to, you and your pimp are trying to get the most money and you need to make sure you're dressed as well as possible so you can get as many tricks.
Or, well, actually...
So is this like a management sim?
Yeah, it's like, this is like if it was Monster Hunter, but just the menus. Just all the menus and trying to style out and get your various tricks out to various places to get, your honey and your green herbs.
Don't forget the shrooms.
Yep.
But yeah, in reality, it is a hoverboard racing game from Criterion Games, which would later go on to make the very successful Burnout series. So I love this game too. I think this is maybe my second favorite launch game, and it's one like Blue Stinger that I just go back to every few months just to, when I don't know what else I want to play, I'll just pop it in and do a few races. And yeah, it's what I will say though is that I think the trick system itself is a little bit I don't know. The design is such that the races focus more on the actual like racing, and you only need to use like a few tricks to get through some of the shortcuts, but you don't actually have to like master the full suite of flips and spins and everything and grabs. You can just kind of get through with minimal trickage. It's not really a mandatory part of the experience for most of the game, which I think there's maybe a little bit of a lost or missed opportunity there, but otherwise I think it's just feels really good to be on those hoverboards. I think it captured those physics in a way that I don't know, not a lot of games have.
Yeah, and so we could also say this is kind of we have Tony Hawk at home, but yeah, that's the one thing that Tony Hawk, the first one, just did so well, is it a skateboarding game that wasn't a racing game. I mean, you were racing against the clock to perform as many tricks and points as you could, but that it wasn't a damn racing game. And I guess this is probably in that regard closer to an SSX, but
that's true.
I can see why this was definitely put up on the needed to be part of the launch lineup. Also, apparently the game is spelled stylized with lowercase TRI and then uppercase CKS, lowercase TY, uppercase LE to make it sick and cool.
I never noticed that. I wonder if that's just a quirk of the font.
That's what it says here on Wikipedia, so it must be true.
Wikipedia would never lie.
Yeah, you can't just like put anything up in there.
I think when I saw it stylized in magazines and stuff, it was always the T and the S were capitalized, but everything else was normal.
Yeah, it looks like it's just like they kind of have the S in the middle is sort of like a cool capital S that kind of swerves around both the K and the T, and I don't think that's. I think you know what Wikipedia. I don't know this claim that it was stylized. I don't think that's. I don't believe you. I think you were off your shit there.
But yeah, I think that's it for like the ambiguous. No, let's do one more. Let's do one more. Hydro Thunder.
I've played this one, so Derek, I presume you have too.
Yeah, actually, I have played this with you two because not to put you on blast here, Brian, but like the Hydro Thunder sequel that I think is on like Xbox 360.
Oh,
you are a
Hurricane.
Beast. You are a monster. Yeah.
Yeah. He kills at water racing games.
Yeah, I guess that's a quite a niche to be tied to, but yeah, sure.
It was shocking because I think it was during pandemic and we were just playing games online, and it was I believe it was like a free Xbox Gold or something like that, and just like, oh, let's play this racing game, and then it was like the four of us, and then like it was just a battle for second place because Brian was just demolishing. He's like, oh, I know this course really well. You got to use this machine with it. Like, whoa, dude.
Oh yeah, no, I figured it really quickly into meeting him. I was like, my goal is to finish the course before he like laps me.
Yeah. But I guess if we're gonna go wrong answers on this, it's always been kind of strange because like hydro is water and thunder is water conducts electricity, so it seems like it's bad. It's dangerous.
I think I'm going to go sort of in the Zoolander-esque area and say it's going to be a Tropic Thunder sequel.
I love it.
Oh, God, but then what kind of regrettable racist humor do they make in Hydro Thunder then?
I'm not touching that one.
Yeah, or should we delete that as well? Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Well, Hydro Thunder, of course, is a pretty popular, at least in the late 90s, it was a pretty popular arcade racing game that was futuristic, I don't know, hydroplane racing, I guess, is what I would classify it as. But it was that classic Midway course design where you would have a lot of branching paths and shortcuts that you would have to explore, and then there was a boost mechanic where you collect boost icons to go faster through your run. And especially in the later levels, those shortcuts and the boosts became mandatory because if you did not drive optimally, you would have kind of a tough time finishing the race before the counter would get you. But yeah, I do have a soft spot for the original, and I love the Xbox follow-up from Vector Unit as well. I don't know, do y'all have any other thoughts on it?
Yeah, it never occurred to me that this is like that they kind of, there's like the San Francisco Rush games, and then there's the Cruisin' games. And so this is like a third one of those Midway racing games because there are many, there's Off-Road Thunder and Arctic Thunder. So this is just the start of another racing franchise, arcade racing franchise for Midway. It had never really occurred to me how many racing games they have.
Yeah, I think between. Well, we'll get into maybe we can mention some of the other ones that they released around the Dreamcast lineup. But yeah, Midway had a surprisingly diverse mix of hits in the arcade for sure.
And on this launch lineup, there's quite a lot of Midway.
Yeah, there were 4, I believe. I guess maybe at this point, I think most of the titles are pretty straightforward, so we can just kind of go through the rest really quickly. But yeah, those other Midway games were NFL Blitz 2000, and then Mortal Kombat Gold was the other, and then Ready to Rumble Boxing. Yeah, Ready to Rumble Boxing. I don't know, any thoughts on, I don't know if anyone's played any of those or if you have any.
It's kind of hard to come up with a fake NFL name.
Yeah, I think these are straightforward enough at this point. We don't have to do that anymore. We can just say if we have any thoughts on them, I guess.
I mean,
well, if you took off the NFL and it was just called Blitz 2000, it can be, like, is it a attack plane simulator?
Yeah, it could be like a war that takes place in the year 2000.
Yeah.
I think that, or it's just a football game, but they lost the NFL license.
Which is not too far from what really did happen.
That's actually what did happen, yeah. In the 360 era.
Yeah, I have fond memories of the Blitz series. I enjoyed playing them growing up.
Yeah, we should play them soon. I kind of, I don't know, I have a soft spot for them as well.
Yeah, they're like NBA Jam but for NFL, and it's sports games are fun, but like it's sort of like I like Burnout over Gran Turismo. I like an arcade version of something that's in real life, and so yeah, like a Blitz or a Jam is more fun than doing like Madden or NFL 2K.
Yeah, I don't know why. Like, I loved Madden up until the point it started getting more realistic, and then it just became less fun. I don't know why.
There's certainly a market for it. They sell a couple copies of those. But me personally, yeah, I prefer the Blitzes and those types of more goofy, over the top, and less serious.
Yeah, I'm with you totally.
I did also have NFL 2K to start on that whole thing. Yeah, that was obviously like their answer to EA Sports not wanting to show on the Dreamcast.
Yeah, basically Sega acquired Visual Concepts to make that and other games of the 2K series, and I think that was probably the best chance or the best deal they could have made at that point to give themselves a fighting chance of having some quality first-party sports.
It was
titles.
A decent shot across the bow, like the 2K, especially the NFL 2K games. I remember I was at a Walmart and they had the whole wall of TVs, right? And they were running NFL 2K. And I remember watching it and thinking it was a real football game for a really long time. Because I think it was just a demo mode. So it might have not had like all the menus and choosing your plays. I might have just been playing a game out. But I thought it was a real game. And then when I realized it wasn't, I was just like, oh my God, you know, that thing of when you're younger, oh, graphics are never going to get better than this.
Honestly, that reminds me of the time I had my Dreamcast at my aunt's house, and I was playing NFL 2K, and my cousin came in, and she was like, "Oh, who's playing? What? You know, what's?" I didn't know NFL season had started already, or something like that. Had to explain that it was a video game. She was a bit surprised, to say the least.
I don't know if there's a whole lot of like memory of that now, but like especially like NFL 2K1 and 2K. Yeah, the launch NFL 2K and then at least 2K1, I recall, were incredibly highly rated games that were, I think, you know, it was always trying to go after the Madden series. Man, I feel like this is one of the few times like that, you know, Sega really came close. Their sports lineup was really, really impressive.
I mean, 2K5 is still considered to be like one of the best, I think.
Is that the one that they released for like, they released like $20 and they were like, yeah, we're going to lose the license after this. So just fuck you. We're going to sell for $20. And yeah, I think people still mod that game and that's still, okay.
Update the rosters. Yeah, it's, the community has really continued to rally around it. And I get why, even playing it more recently. Like, I think there's things about 2K5 that have just, I don't know, make it kind of timeless in the way it feels and the way the physics and the tackling and the animation, like everything kind of comes together in a really convincing way. And it just feels really good to play in a way that more recent Madden games have kind of reverted to the wonkier physics systems where there's a lot more glitches and weirdness that result, or that can result, which I think is fun in its own right, but I can kind of get how 2K5 would feel relatively more weighty and intentional for a lot of people. Even today, it's held up surprisingly well. Plus, it had a cribs mode, so.
It did.
What? I didn't realize that.
Oh, yeah.
You could deck out your crib with whatever.
Yep. With all of the, you know, trophies you win.
That's kind of, I guess that's why the, like the Def Jam games, like they're basketball games, but eventually there was like icons where you were just like, it was very cribs based and getting your bling and that type of thing. It was moving more and more, kind of, it's like Animal Crossing, but for, you know, NBA stars.
Yeah.
So there were a few other launch games. We already talked about Sonic Adventure. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that. Soul Calibur, you had also mentioned, Derek. So,
the
other one, the next one, let's say Arrow Wings, which was a flight game, but not a flight combat game.
Sounds like a flight sim.
It kind of was. It was like an arcade-ish flight sim, but the trick was that you were a stunt pilot in like a, air show, kind of like a, I think it was based on the Japanese, Blue Impulse, which is similar to like the Blue Angels that the Navy has, which do air shows every year, and they do formation flying and all sorts of stuff. So it was just a game kind of built around that as a concept. So I had a good time with it. I think it's still a pretty fun little game, but it's probably not one I play super often.
You did have the air combat game though with was it Air Force Delta?
Air Force Delta.
Or Deadly Skies, as it was called in Europe.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right. I forgot that Konami... Yeah, so Konami developed that, and I don't think Konami made a ton of Dreamcast games.
No.
I think Castlevania Resurrection was canceled. But yeah, Air Force Delta...
they had Silent Scope as well.
Oh, they did do Silent Scope. Okay. Well, they did a few.
Oh, you can play that game with a mouse and the VMU.
Wait, which one? Silent Scope? Yeah.
Silent Scope, yeah. But it looks like Konami did a lot of Dance Dance Revolution and Poppin'.
Yeah.
They had a decent They had a decent, I think, if you're looking at the numbers, a decent output on Dreamcast, but when you see that it's like, oh, they published Nightmare Creatures 2? What? Okay, that's strange. But yeah, there's a lot of sports and arcade games is mostly what Konami did, so perhaps that was the most, noteworthy collection on Dreamcast here.
Yeah, I guess maybe like top of mind larger games. I can't really think of a ton. But yeah, I guess Silent Scope is a pretty big one. So
I think it's funny at the lack of Capcom in this launch lineup, considering how much they supported the Dreamcast in the longer term. What have you got? Power Stone? Is that it?
Mm-hmm.
That's mad.
I think that's it. Marvel vs. Capcom would have been the next one. And that came out, I think it just missed launch. It just came out a few weeks after.
Yeah. I think another one I wanted to get the US perspective on was House of the Dead 2. I actually forgot this was on the launch lineup. That's like really cool that you could get a light gun game at launch. And, just speaking from my own point of view, back when like light gun games were like the big thing with home consoles, though they blew my mind. It was like, what? You can have a gun and shoot at things on the TV? This is the greatest thing ever. But I remember like hearing somewhere like in the US, like you couldn't get the Sega light gun, and could you get like a bundle on launch? Do you know with a light gun, like the Mad Catz one?
I don't. If there was a bundle, it'd be probably like an unofficial one, like the Babbage's or Software Etc. would bundle it, but I don't believe it was. I don't believe there is a big boxed House of the Dead 2. But that was another game that was like, holy shit, this looks like an arcade game, and it runs just like flawlessly, and it's like, this is at home on my TV. I have a light gun, but I do not believe it's an official. I think it is a Mad Catz one, and I think because of America was really weird with its guns around that time. Like there's like Resident Evil Survivor as opposed to Gun Survivor, and stuff like that. And so I think that maybe there was like the fishing rod and the mouse and the fighting stick, but maybe Sega didn't release their official light gun.
I honestly don't remember seeing it in the store, but
they may have released it like a little later, but or they might not have released it at all. Yeah, I don't recall.
They didn't. Yeah. So Sega itself, I think they kind of let Interact and Mad Catz. I think Mad Catz's light gun, the Dream Gun, I think it was called, was the closest that there was to an official Sega Dreamcast's light gun. But yeah, there really wasn't a Sega made one in the States. Certainly Japan had it. I don't know, Lewis, did Europe get one?
Yeah, you could get a House of the Dead 2 like bundle. It's like in a big box with the official one. It makes me wonder if a few people who'd bought this at launch were just using the controller then. It sounds a bit depressing, to be honest. But
you couldn't. I mean, you could, but you couldn't play this game with a controller. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really funny because it was in the demo disc that came with the console, and that I think the expectation is that you would just use the controller to play the House of the Dead 2 level, and then would be enticed to buy it after that.
Oh, I guess I had the Interact Starfire, and I recall playing that with a lot of the 3 light gun games that are on the Dreamcast, and it being very good.
Yeah, Confidential Mission and
the Virtua Cop 2 that was on
Virtua
the
Cop 2.
Yeah, that there's a hidden HD not a remake, but kind of like a updated version of Virtua Cop 2 on the Sega Genesis Gems
Smash Pack.
The Smash Pack, yes. Yeah.
Volume 1.
Yeah. No Death Crimson Ox, Derek. Have you played that one?
Oh my god. And I do have Death Crimson, and I can't believe I just had forgotten. I love Death Crimson. How could I have forgotten Death Crimson? Oh my god.
Let's see. Other launch games. I think we're pretty much through the list. Tokyo Extreme Racer / Tokyo Highway Challenge in Europe
Yeah,
/
that one was pretty good.
Shotoku Battle in Japan.
Another racing game for me, so. But, I mean, you guys enjoy racing games, so, I mean, it sounds like it was a good one.
Well, the idea is that, like, it's you're just on the highway and someone flashes their lights at you and it's like, oh, and it's on. But it was just like a racing game that was also happening on like an actual road with traffic. So you're not just trying to navigate the track. You're also trying to snake around pedestrian cars, which was a pretty unique way to do it. It was right before, your Grand Theft Autos and your Crazy Taxis. And so it was kind of one of the first games that I can remember where you were driving, but there's also traffic.
I think it also preceded that like craze of like, Need for Speed, Underground, Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, that whole like street racing kind of boom that happened in the early 2000s. Like this was almost like a little bit early to that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was definitely immersed in the Tokyo tuner culture.
Yeah,
sure.
That's it, yeah.
So, I mean, it predated, like, this is where the Tokyo Drift idea came from. I guess I hadn't really thought about how Tokyo Extreme Racer, God, I feel like I'm speaking out of pocket, but like, is that a bit of a kind of a
trailblazer?
Watershed. Yeah, trailblazer. Yeah, I was thinking watershed. That's not the right word, but yeah, a bit of an important game, kind of one of the first of its kinds. I hadn't really thought that deeply about it, but it did spawn a decent little series of a couple of sequels. Oh wow, no, it spawned quite a few sequels. My mistake. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think in Japan it went on for ages, didn't it?
Oh,
yeah.
And it looks like in Japan that there were games reaching back all the way to like 94. Okay, all right. I'm going to stop myself here, but apparently the Tokyo Xtreme Racer is a much deeper rabbit hole than I had ever considered it was.
Yeah, it's a pretty chill racing game, I'd say. I kind of loved the oscillation between like cruising around the city, the highways at night, and then when the battles would start with the other rival gangs, it was almost felt like a fighting game a bit because you had the health bars, and then whoever was behind would lose health, and so you just go until one of them KO'd, so to speak.
It had style too, and it was just a style. It kind of reminds me of Metropolis Street Racer as well, which just had like a really great, fun, like synthy soundtrack, and there are a lot of cool, stylish games for the Dreamcast. Maybe I'm getting myself off topic here, but when Tokyo Extreme, and then of course Jet Grind Radio, and a lot of Dreamcast games were cool, and maybe perhaps in an older, maybe arguably cringy way, but I feel like this is where graphics and UI and all that stuff had been kind of figured out with 3D in the third dimension, and then there was room for style. There's room for a racing game in 3D, which we have done before, but now we can have a really interesting aesthetic attached to it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the games have aged really well. Like, look at something like Crazy Taxi. I think that's a game that you could just port to, PS5, Xbox, Switch, and it's still fun. It kind of just does what it says on the tin. It's cool. And it's fast, and as long as you've got the Offspring, it's good to go, in my opinion. And I think
that might be the problem is like you have to have those 2 or 3 Offspring songs, and it's like it's not worth it. But without the yeah, like what are we doing? It's just it's not the same.
No, but a lot just so I think it's like compare, the games on Dreamcast to say like what had come just before it, and the graphics, they still hold up. Whereas maybe if you had PS1 games, maybe not so much, like, and Nintendo 64, like, yeah, Dreamcast definitely was like a big leap.
Yeah, I'm always going to have a soft spot for the graphics of, say, the PS1. Like, I'm really enjoying sort of their comeback in the indie scene right now. There's a lot of, 3D games inspired by that. But I do agree that the Dreamcast is sort of the first time I looked at game graphics, and it felt like the beginning of the modern era. I think a lot of them still look really good. I think a lot of the art direction for most of the games was really, well done and future-proof, so to speak. Yeah, I think they still look great, and a lot of them still play great too.
Yeah, I really do feel like around Dreamcast PS2, honestly, video games peaked. We can stop. We just needed faster load times, better camera control, and maybe more advanced articulation with animations and stuff like that. But I really feel like people say this game looks like a PS2 game, and that's like a compliment. I think that like Dreamcast is sort of that modern era where like maybe quality of life issues kind of prevent the game from truly aging so perfectly. But yeah, like Katie, what you're saying is so many Dreamcast games I think age wonderfully, and if you were to re-release some of these games, like you were saying about Crazy Taxi, just plop that game onto a PS5 and you're kind of done. There's really nothing much that needs to be improved. Faster load times and better camera, slightly better controls, kind of across the board. But outside of that, aesthetically, the Dreamcast was the start of that era where, like, I personally think, yeah, we're kind of done with graphics. We've kind of hit it. We don't need to be much better than this.
I think one of the things that drew me to it was how, Sega's studios especially, but how they would seek to innovate in other ways, because they had so much ambition and creativity across all of their studios that it was like, how do we explore new concepts to base games around, and new styles and aesthetics, and they kind of saw the diminishing returns of the fidelity race at that point, and kind of focus that creativity on, well, what can we do conceptually for, games that use, weird hardware, like a Seaman might use the microphone to talk to a manfish, or, the Sombra de Migo maracas, and, music games that explore some of that, or Space Channel 5, which had its own kind of retro futuristic vibe. So I think there's a lot to be said for that focus, and for better or worse, right? I don't know if all of those concepts were necessarily marketable, and that was probably one of Sega's main challenges, but I'm glad they took those risks, even if they didn't necessarily pay off.
Brian, I just wanted to ask, I suppose yourself, Katie, and Derek, like, when you first played the Dreamcast, like, how did you feel about, like, the hardware, the VMU, the controller? Like, how did it look to you? Like, did it look quite exciting and, like, modern? Or, I just wondered what your reactions to that were back when you first played it.
To me, it felt modern. I think the fact alone that it used a disk drive instead of a cartridge felt really modern to me. I know the PS1 was already doing it, but I think, and I love the VMUs. I thought they were great. I want to say, though, the Dreamcast controller is one of my least favorite controllers of all time. Does not feel comfortable to hold. And even back then, I did not like it. My hands were smaller and it was still uncomfortable. It's just not an ergonomic controller.
Yeah.
The D-pad, playing Resident Evil is actually a difficult on a Dreamcast controller, because pushing up and not accidentally leaning to the left or right and making your character kind of swerve. I recall playing Resident Evil 3 on Dreamcast and trying to successfully get away from Nemesis was quite difficult. I think that the VMU is such a cool idea, and having that extra screen is brilliant. But honestly, the Dreamcast controller is kind of weird and maybe straight up kind of bad, but the games are still enjoyable. It's still worth playing, but yeah, I would say that I do have some reservations about the quality and design of the controller.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, at the time, I'm sure I had a higher tolerance for it, but when I play for extended periods today, I feel like the angle of which it has my wrists go inward rather than resting, in the palms more naturally. Just that alone makes it kind of painful after a bit, at least for me. So I tend to cheat and use, Brooke has a adapter that the Wingman SD, I think it's called, and so that lets you use pretty much any modern controller with the Dreamcast, and then it has its own built-in save blocks as well. So I think that's my preferred way to play Dreamcast games, at least for longer periods of time today. But maybe the console itself, I felt, seemed fairly advanced at the time. I mean, it was definitely right for the price. I remember I got it on launch day for $200, $199, whatever. And I thought that was, even as a 14-year-old without much disposable income at the time, I still felt that was pretty reasonable. Although the only game I could afford at launch was Sonic Adventure. So it took me a few weeks of renting stuff like Soul Calibur and eventually getting more games to really see the full potential of the platform. All right. Well, with that, I think maybe there's two other games. I don't think we really have to talk too much about them. They're both racing games. Monaco Grand Prix from Ubisoft, as well as Flag to Flag, or Kart Flag to Flag Racing, which was developed by Zoom Inc. I think they made the Mr. Mosquito games later on for PS2, and it was published by Sega. And I like them both, but I don't think they're necessarily widely appealing games to everyone.
I was just going to say Monaco Grand Prix wins the award for the most names of a game. It's, Monaco Grand Prix Racing Simulation 2, Racing Simulation Monaco Grand Prix, Racing Simulation 2. Yeah, it was known as like multiple different things. Like it had different names across Europe as well, which was kind of crazy. But yeah,
wow.
Yeah, there you go. Facts that you didn't need to know.
Do you know anyone who's been collecting all of the variants?
I think Mike from the Junkyard has probably got most of them. Like, that's how I found out about it. But there's also an online version that's called like Racing Simulation 2 Monaco Grand Prix Online. Yeah. So anyway,
they really hung their hat on that Monaco aspect of it, and maybe it's like there are certain areas of the world where like nobody knows what Monaco is. So it's like the Japanese one is called Racing Simulator 2. Oh wait, no, hold on. Yes, Monaco Grand Prix : Racing Simulator 2, but I guess in the PAL region it's Racing Simulator : Monaco Grand Prix. So which gets the emphasis here? Which is like, at the is it the racing or the Monaco is the tip of the spear? What are we doing?
Yeah, the US just went Monaco Grand Prix. Just that's it.
Oh, so it's like, yeah, we know it's a racing simulator. It's like we can see the car on the cover. Yes, it's racing. We get it.
I think with that, we might just start to wrap up. Maybe if there's any last anecdotes or thoughts, or maybe...
we didn't talk about Ready to Rumble boxing. I don't have much to say about it, but just that it was pretty good. And I think that there's always been, certainly was back then, like the shadow of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, of Nintendo's Punch-Out games, like loomed heavy for a while, maybe still does, that there's just there hadn't really been a boxing game that even, came close. And Ready to Rumble was like kind of close to, it was cartoony and it was fun and it was arcadey and it had a bit of depth, I recall, but was a little more wild and kind of crazy than on Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. But the Ready to Rumble boxing games, they made a couple of them. It was for a hot minute a bit of a franchise, and it was another solid Dreamcast launcher.
Yeah, totally. I think one of the selling points leading up to it was the deformation of the bruises and face like wounds, that if boxers took too much damage on one side, they might get a black eye or something.
Yeah. Actually, just kind of looking at the Wikipedia article, this was one of the higher rated games at launch. It's kind of across the board. It's a lot of 9s and 8s. And if I recall Dreamcast launching, and I had the copy EGM, and they gave Soul Calibur a platinum, a perfect 10, and they gave Sonic Adventure a gold with like all 9s, and then they gave Ready to Rumble a silver with all 8s. And I think that their consensus was kind of like those were the big three to get on launch. And I don't know that people really I don't feel like I ever hear anyone talk about Ready to Rumble boxing, but at the time it's one of those. I think it was a contender, and I think it did move a lot of. I think it put some numbers on the board. I don't know if anyone really remembers that anymore.
Yeah, I would say maybe NFL 2K would have been the other one in that tier, as far as games that actually like moved the hardware with some decent sales.
And also, and Power Stone maybe.
Well, one last thing maybe to add to the episode is something that I thought was quite cool about the American launch is like some of the advertising. Like, do you remember seeing that? I mean, it was kind of weird. Like, it kind of went for this, like the whole It's Thinking thing, and like this idea that the Dreamcast was alive. Like one of them, it's always weird seeing this, obviously, with all the AI stuff going on now. There's like one ad that's like 99.99, and then it's artificial intelligence hint, outsmarting it will only make it smarter. It's like with all these like weird graphics that almost look like they're from like kind of like 90s PC games of like people screaming. Sort of industrial, like it's weird. I don't know if you've ever seen those ads or you remember them from back in the day.
There was such a huge media blitz leading up to the Dreamcast, and yeah, they went so big with it. I think they had to scale it back shortly after the launch because I think the money was running out, and of course the story goes that like there was Dreamcast was sold out. They couldn't keep it on the shelves until suddenly no one bought it. It was just kind of an overnight thing where just like they couldn't move these things at all. And I think that, yeah, there was a lot of hype for this machine. They advertised it really, really well. And it launched really well, but I always kind of get the impression that by the time, the early showings of PS2 were kind of starting to make their rounds on magazines and showing up in Japan and people were importing it, that just, it was like even just like the threat of the PS2 doomed the Dreamcast. It wasn't even the system itself. It was just reports and previews and little bits and pieces. And people were like, yeah, if I hadn't gotten Dreamcast yet, I'm just going to wait. But for a hot minute, they really had the attention of the gaming public.
Well, I think that's probably a good spot to start wrapping it up. Does anyone have any other final impressions that they would like to share?
It's still thinking. That's it. Yeah.
There we go. And as it just so happens, we do have a few more words to help commemorate this occasion, and those come from none other than Dreamcast Junkyard founder Tom Charnock. Take it away, Tom.
Hey Brian, hey DreamPod crew and everybody listening to this podcast. This is Tom, formerly of the Dreamcast Junkyard DreamPod. Just wanted to say, wow, what a 25 years it's been for the Dreamcast and, for the community. Without the community that supports this amazing console, where would we be? So, what can I say? So many memories, so many amazing things that have come out of the community in the sort of the post-mortem Dreamcast years. Who would have thought that a console that shone brightly for maybe 2 or 3 years in its prime is still being supported all these years later in the year 2024 with new games, new hardware, new peripherals, and just it's just a really exciting time to be a Dreamcast fan. So yeah, happy birthday to the Dreamcast, and as ever, thank you to all you people listening to this podcast and to the crew at the Dreamcast Junkyard who continue to keep fighting the good fight and spreading the gospel of the Dreamcast. Long may it continue. Adios.
All right, well, with that, thank you all very much for hopping on and chatting about the Dreamcast some quarter century later. Yeah, it was great to have you all, and I think we can just go around the room, and thanks, Katie, for joining. I really appreciate it. And Derek, where can people find you?
I'm Uncle Derek. I'm from Stop Skeletons and Fighting. I'm on YouTube. I am on Twitter as well as Blue Sky and Tumblr. But usually just I'm Stop Skeletons. And I guess I will be at Portland Retro Expo next month. So if you're listening to this, come and see me there. We'll be playing some Faceball 2000 16-player on the Game Boy.
Oh, nice. How about you, Lewis?
You can find me on Twitter or X at LewisJFC. And thanks to Katie and Derek for coming on. It's been really fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to be here.
And Brian, of course. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this conversation with me once again.
Well, I'm glad you could join, Lewis. It was a lot of fun having you on. I also, I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky, I think, as Jet Brian Radio. I don't really do a lot of other stuff beyond those, so that's pretty much where I'm at. And then Lewis, where can we find Dreamcast Junkyard stuff other than this podcast?
Yeah, so you can get us on thedreamcastjunkyard.co.uk. We are on Twitter or X at the DC Junkyard. We're on other stuff. We're on Facebook. We have a Facebook group. We're on YouTube. Most of those, obviously, you can just search for the Dreamcast Junkyard. And if you do want to send a little bit of money our way to help with the running costs of the podcast and the website, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/DC Junkyard. And that is everything.
Fantastic. Well, with that, thank you everybody for tuning in, and yeah, it's still thinking. Pretty wild.
And you know what? We're still thinking about the Dreamcast.
This is a Dreamcast disc. 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 And is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers. Please stop this disc now.